Hey everyone, how is it going? I am going to be knitting along to the Flax sweater by Tin Can Knits. It's a free pattern that you can just download off of their website. It's a fantastic starting point because it's basic, customizable, and free. The Flax sweater is such a blank canvas. There's many modifications that you can make. There's two different lengths, like crop and full length. I'm going to be doing the full length. And there's short rows that you can do. So that's another PDF that you can get for free. Short rows are where you work the back panel back and forth, so not all the way around the sweater, so that you've got more rows on the back, so that that sits higher than the front of the neck, so when you sit down, the sweater isn't choking you. You don't have to do those, but I'm going to be doing them around the collar there. I'm going to show you what short rows look like on a sweater. So I've got the bottom of this sweater even, not that you can really see on camera there, but you can see that gap. There's extra rows there on the back panel. So if it didn't have short rows, it would look like this. But because it does, the back sits higher than the front, much more comfortable. So when it comes to sizing, there's many sizing options that they've got listed on this Flax pattern. I'm just doing the 0 to 6 months for my little nephew. So I go through and circle everything that correlates to that size so you don't have to kind of stop and do that later. So I need 270 yards of yarn. I'm just using a bit of scrap yarn or yarn that I've got lying around for this. I always suggest reading over a pattern at least once, I suppose, or just having a look at how it's constructed before you start. If you're new and the Flax is your first sweater, you might want to read through it a few times. It has really good pictures that I found helpful when I first started knitting because I just had no idea how it was knit. Now, there's two options for where you start for the Flax. You can start at the top of the collar and knit down, or just below the collar, and then you come back to the neckline, you pick up stitches and knit the collar upwards. The second option is, it's a bit more, it has a bit more structure to it, I suppose, but either way is fine. The abbreviations section in the pattern usually tells you what techniques you need to be able to knit this garment. So this one's pretty straightforward. It's got knit stitches, purl stitches, knit two together, purl two together, which are basic decreases. I think there's slip slip knit in there, knit front and back, which is an increase stitch. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Just check that you can do all of those. If we look at the gauge, it says 18 stitches by 22 rounds in 4 inches in stockinette using the larger needles, which is suggested to be 5mm. So this is how we know that the sweater is going to end up the size we want it to be. We get a ruler, you knit a large swatch. Knit it in the round as well because that's how we'll be knitting the sweater. Some people knit differently flat in the round. We measure across and then measure down, and we want to hit that gauge. You also want to measure before and after you wash it because it might change size. If you don't hit the right gauge, then change your needle size so that you do. It's much more important you get the gauge than use the needles suggested in the pattern. So if you measure across and you've got, say, 23 stitches instead of 18, go up a needle size and try again. And vice versa if you've got too few stitches in that window. So I'll be using my 5mm needles for the body and 4mm for the collar and cuffs. Mine are interchangeable, my needles, so I've got a cable that I'll screw onto them and I'll fasten using the pin. That's really important. They will not come loose if you use the pin. At the start I didn't use it and they used to slowly unscrew. I've got my stitch marker. I'll be using a couple more because you'll need more than one. I've got my scissors, measuring tape, and a darning needle for when we seam in the ends. I need some stitch holders, but I've also got my yarn here, so I'll be using just some yarn I've got sitting in my stash there. We can use waste yarn or a stitch holder to pop the sleeve stitches on while we continue to work the body because that's how raglans are knit. So I've got some stitch holders. Alrighty, casting on. I'm doing option 2, so I'm casting on with my larger needles. If you're doing option 1, you can still follow along. So I'm leaving an end to weave in, and a little trick just so I know where to do the slip knot for my long tail cast on. I wrap the yarn around my needle. I need 56, I could do it 56 times, but I'm going to do it 10 times. And then I'm kind of going to double the yarn over, so I will have about 20 there, 30, 40, 50, I need 56, so I'm just going to do my slip knot about here. So it might not be perfect, but it's not hopefully going to be too far off. You can always do a, just do it, and if you have a long end, you can just like snip it off, but I don't like to waste yarn a lot of the time. So now it's time for the long tail cast on. You don't have to use the long tail cast on, you can use a different one if you like, and over time you'll figure out what you like and what you don't like, and there's great videos on YouTube to explore. So I'm just about at 20 stitches. When I get there, I'm going to grab one of my stitch markers and pop that on the needle. So now I know there's 20 stitches there. I don't have to recount the whole 56. It just makes it a little bit easier, I find. And then I remove them when I'm knitting around the first round. Alright, and we continue. Alright, I'm just going to fast forward this bit while I talk over the top. Alright, so I have 56 stitches on my needle. I'm all cast on. I'm now going to use a technique that you don't have to use, but I'm going to show you anyway. Basically, it just makes the gap from the join, the front to the back, really snug. So I'm going to cast on an extra stitch. And what I'm going to do is I transfer one of those to the other needle and then knit two together when I'm starting. So you decrease it back to 56, but it's just going to make sure that gap isn't there between the two. So I don't have many stitches on my longer cable, so I'm just folding it in half and pulling half of this cable out the way, and you can see we're making a smaller circle on a larger cable. So I've got to move the stitches to the ends of my needle because I have to transfer one stitch over. It's always tricky the first couple of rounds because it's tight and fiddly. That is completely normal, so don't be worried about that. Now we want to make sure our stitches aren't twisted as well, that they're all facing the same way. I'm going to transfer one stitch over, like I said. This is that closing the gap method. Popping the stitch marker on. If you're not doing that extra stitch, just pop it on. I'm just going to tighten the end there, but I can come back and do that later. Alright, so because I did the long tail cast on, I'm counting that as a first row, which you can do as well, but you don't have to. You can still knit around a row. I'm going to jump to the increase row where I have to increase 4 stitches, so I'll end up with 60 stitches by the end of the row. I'm going to knit the first two together, like I said, to get me back down to 56. So let me just do that. If you didn't do that, then you don't have to. You just knit your stitch as per normal. If you're doing option 1 and you're knitting the collar first, you'll be doing whatever ribbing you want to do, 1 by 1, 2 by 2, on smaller needles for however long you'd like the collar, around 1 or 1.5 inches depending on what size you're doing, and then everyone will be doing this increase row. I'll be coming back to the collar. So I'm increasing 4 stitches on this round to get 60 stitches, so every 14th stitch I'm doing a KFB. So we're just about up to the stitch where we have to do the KFB, knit front and back. So we knit through the stitch, we've got the stitch on the needle on the right hand side, we don't drop the left hand stitch off yet as we normally would. You pop your needle through the back and do a stitch as per normal. So we've got 2 stitches on the right hand side from that stitch, and then we just drop the stitch on the left hand needle off, and we keep going until we get to the next increase. When I get up to this marker that I popped on to count my stitches when I was casting on, I'm just going to chuck them off and set them aside. So using a longer cable, you can kind of use a traveling loop method, whereas when you're knitting, every so often you just pull the cable out where I am now, but I kind of went to the end of the needle then, so you can see my empty needle kind of sitting on the table there, and then I'm kind of pushing the stitches back up. You don't have to get to that stage all the time. You can pull the cable out so it's kind of in the same position, kind of where my fingers are now all the time, but I kind of forgot then. Or you can kind of just reset yourself all the time. So I've kind of pulled out 2 loops there just to make my needles meet. So I just wanted to show you how kind of fiddly and annoying it can be at the start, especially if you're first learning to use a cable. It can be a bit tricky, but you'll get used to it and it'll be second nature and you won't even think about it when you're knitting. So I've just done that first row and I'm just knitting 1 past the marker. If you do that, it just means that your marker won't slip off and you'll be looking around for it. So I either go 1 before or 1 after the marker when I set my work down. And I'm just going to tick that row off on my pattern. Right, so I've done that row. I've got the 60 stitches on my needle. We're up to the next part, which is the marker set up round. So for my size, I have to purl 10, place a marker, knit 20, place a marker, and repeat that another time. So you've got your number, if you're doing a different size, indicated there. I'm actually not going to be doing the garter panel. A lot of people omit this because they just want a plain stockinette stitch looking sweater, so you can do that as well, but we still need to place the markers there because we're separating the sleeves and the front and the back, so the different panels. So I'm going to be knitting those 10 stitches instead of purling like I said. So if you're doing the garter panel, you'll be purling right now how many stitches are indicated. I'm going to be knitting my 10 and then we're going to be popping a marker on to separate that panel from the next. You can see I'm trying to get the cable out the way and just getting my needles to meet. It will get easier. So everyone's doing knit stitches now, so I'm knitting, for me, what's 20 stitches to the next place marker spot. So no one will be purling right now. So we're placing a marker, and now again you'll be purling. If you're doing the garter panel, I'm knitting, so I'm knitting my 10 stitches. Placing another marker, and then there should be 20 stitches left for me that everyone will be knitting across, or however many you've got to the beginning of round marker. I forgot to mention, make sure your beginning of round marker is a different colour. So I'm remembering here that my beginning of marker is pink. You'll have the tail end of the yarn coming out, but just in case when you're new, it's just easier. Alright, so if we look at our different panels, the markers are separating the front, the back, one sleeve, and then the other sleeve. If we have a look at the pictures in the pattern, we basically got a marker separating those sections there, and there. Sorry for the light does get better. And we're up to the next round, which involves increases. So setup round 1 says knit front and back, knit to 2 stitches before the raglan marker, knit front and back, knit 1, slip marker, and do that 4 times. So we're going to be increasing a total of 8 stitches all the way around. So I'm knitting through the front and back. We've already done this technique just before. So now we've got an extra stitch on our needle. And we're going to knit to 2 stitches before my next marker. Alright, so you can see I've got 2 stitches just before the marker. We're going to knit through the front, knit through the back, and pop that stitch off the needle. We've increased 1. Then we knit that stitch, slip the marker, and we repeat that. So we do the first stitch, the increase on the first stitch after the marker. So we're going to increase that one again, go into that stitch, knit front and back, off the needle, and then again 2 stitches before the next marker we'll do another KFB. I thought I'd just show you the last panel before we get to the end of this round. So I'm doing an increase on the first stitch, stitching to 2 stitches before the pink marker, and knit front and back on the second to last stitch, knitting 1, and then we're back at, well, we're at the start of the next round. So setup round 2 involves purling. So just to talk about the garter panel for a sec, the garter look is achieved by knitting one row and then purling the next. So the garter panel isn't growing. So if it was 10 stitches, it's always going to be those 10 stitches running down the sleeve. If it's 15, it's going to be those 15 stitches. So I'm not doing it, so I'll just be knitting this panel, but you would have been knitting one, purling your garter panel, knitting the one before the marker, then knitting across the longer section, and then getting to the marker and repeating that. I would suggest learning how to read your knitting. So you can see on the right side of my work here, it looks like V stitches, and then on the back you can see little purl bumps. It's really handy so you don't have to kind of keep track of where you're up to. But for the garter panel, like I said, one row will be knit, one row will be purl. You can write it down, knit, purl, and then mark them off as you go so you know what you're up to, especially if it's your first sweater and you're just kind of figuring out how to do all of this. It can be handy just to keep track. So we're up to the next round, round 1, knit front and back, knit to 2 stitches before the raglan marker, knit front and back, knit 1 slip marker, and repeat that 4 times. So you're increasing 8 stitches in total. So basically what we'll call an increase round. So it's the same as the setup round 1, was it called? So I just didn't finish this row because I didn't want the marker to slip off. So I'm going to be knitting the front and back for this first stitch, knitting to 2 stitches before the marker, doing another KFB, slipping the marker, and repeating that again. So yeah, we do that to the end of the round, and if you want, you can just go around your needles and count and check, especially if this is the first time you're knitting a sweater, just so you know if you stuff up, where you've kind of stuffed up, and you can catch it sooner rather than later. So we're back to the beginning of round marker. I'm just knitting 1 pass so it doesn't slip off. Setting that down, we've ticked off round 1. Cool. We're up to round 2. So no increases this round. This is just working as set. So we'll be knitting a majority of the stitches and you'll just be purling that garter panel if you're doing it. If I was doing the garter panel, I'd be knitting 2 stitches, purling 10, and then knitting 2. So you can see we're increasing either side of the marker, but they will be knit stitches like I said before. What you can do to make sure you don't purl stitches you're not meant to purl is you can grab another set of markers and just pop them either side of the garter panel, and that way it should be pretty clear, especially at the start. It's hard to read your knitting until it kind of forms a pattern. And I'll be knitting this round all the way around because, like I said, I'm not doing the garter panel. So we finished round 2. I'll tick that off. And it says here, work rounds 1 to 2 a total of 7 times for me. Yours will have potentially a different number. So we'll be increasing 1 row and working as a set the second. So I usually mark it to the left. If you can read your knitting, you'll be able to see if you did an increase row the last round. But yeah, like I said, to begin with, just jot it down next to round 1 or round 2 on a separate bit of paper or whatever you want to do. And the last 2 rounds do count because it says a total of 7. But now we're going to do the increase row again. So it's nothing we haven't done before at this point. So we'll be increasing 8 stitches on this round. So I'm just going to speed through this. The other thing is, if you forget where you're up to and you forget to count or you forget to jot one down, you can look at the pattern, and under a heading that says all sizes, it's got how many stitches you should have in total, and then at the sleeves and at the back and front. So you can do a bit of math and figure out how many increase rows you've done from that. So I just did an increase round and a set round, so I'm just going to mark them off. So now we've got a fair few rows done, I just want to show you what the raglan increases look like at the shoulder kind of area. So you can see a very clear pattern going on. Okay, so I've finished the 7 lots of those 2 rows, so I can tick all those off. So if you're knitting size 3, 4, 5 or 6 extra large, there's an extra couple of steps that you have to do. You have to do around 3 and 4, possibly a few times. So round 3 is just your increase row where you're increasing by 8 stitches, and round 4 is a combination of the increase row but incorporating the garter panel in there, so you'll be purling that garter panel. Our next step is to add some length to the yoke before we separate the body and the sleeves. So this is working even. There's no increases. If you're doing the garter panel, you have to maintain that and you have to end on the row that you've just done the purls. So it does have an indication of how many rounds you might need to knit, but if you just look at the length, just in case you don't match gauge, there's the option 1 where you started with the collar and the option 2 where you're going to come back and do the collar later because we're measuring from the cast on edge. So for my size 0 to 6 months, I just have to make sure my yoke measures 3.5 inches before I move on to the next step. So measuring mine, I need a little bit more, and I've counted how many rows, and I need to do about 4 rows, so my gauge was pretty much on there. So I'll knit those 4 rows. If in doubt, I always say knit more because you don't want the jumper pinching up underneath your arms. When I knit my first sweater, I was so excited to move on to the next step that I was like, close enough. And I could wear it, but it was a little uncomfortable. If there's one thing I would change from that sweater, it would be adding more length to the yoke. I'm just going to fast forward those rows because it's just boring stockinette stitch. If you're doing short rows, now is the time. If you're not, you can skip this step. So I've grabbed my short row instructions because it's a different PDF. And the first instructions say to place the center back marker. So you've got to knit to the marker and slip marker 3 times, knit 18 and then place the center back marker. So it's exactly how it sounds. It's going in the middle of the back panel. Now, because I have the length, I'm not doing an extra row. If you're doing the garter panel, you'll have to do the extra row, but I knit an extra one before. So I'm just counting 18 stitches in because that's what my size indicates, and I'm placing the center back marker, which is that white marker. That center back marker is the middle of our work now, and we're working around that. So short row 1 says to knit 24. I've already knit 18 because that's where that pink marker is. So this will be 19, 20, and I've just got to get to 24 and then turn my work. Now it's time to use whatever short row technique you want to use, German short rows, wrap and turns. I don't know why, but I used one that I don't actually like, so I apologize for that. It's not the one in the instructions. The reason why we have to use some kind of technique to turn our work and we can't just turn it and purl back is because it will leave a gap between the stitches. Now, the wrap and turns that I'm doing, they do leave a little purl bump that I don't like, but I think when I used their technique, it gives the illusion of 2 stitches when it's only 1, and you have to knit them together later on a row, and I forgot to, so my stitch count was off, so I shied away from them, but they are better. So I would recommend doing the one in the pattern. But with the wrap and turns, basically you slip the first stitch like I've just done, you pull the work to the front, you slip the stitch back as you can see, and then you move the working yarn to the back. So basically you've just wrapped around that stitch. Now we turn the work and we're free to purl back the other way. So that's short row 1 done. I'm going to demonstrate how they have it in their instructions. Again, I wish I had have done it that way, but it was just that one time that scarred me. Let's just pretend we've done a right side row. Sorry, I'm at a different spot now just to show you guys. I've turned the work, and what we do is we slip the left hand stitch there onto the right hand needle purlwise. So I'm just doing that here. Then I'm taking the yarn over to the back, over the top of the needle, and then between the needles. So we've added an extra loop on that needle. Later on, you'll go around and knit that together so that you don't have an extra stitch. And it's very similar to when you're on the other side, and it's easy, so hopefully that helps. So back to where we were. After we turn the work, we have to purl to the center back marker and then purl a further 24 stitches. So that's the same number that we just knitted. So that's why we're working symmetrical around that center back marker. So virtually it's the same thing, just on the other side. Right, so I've just about purled 24 stitches, and I have to do my silly wrap and turn. Don't do them, people. No, you can if you like. No, but don't. And yeah, so now it's time for whatever short row technique you'd like to use. The next set of instructions, short row 3 on the right side, say knit to center back marker, slip marker, and then knit to 5 stitches before the doubled stitch, or what I wish for me was a doubled stitch, and do your turn there. And now that I'm here, I have to do my wrap and turn or whatever technique. And then when we're on the wrong side there, we just have to purl to 5 stitches before the last turn, which I've just done. Sorry, I'm not sure I filmed that. So for me, this is my last wrap and turn because I only have to do row 3 and 4 once, but you may have to repeat it more times depending on what size you're doing. Once we've done that final turn, we just have to knit to the beginning of round marker. When you get to the center back marker, that white one for me, I just discard that, which I'll do in a second. I guess I forgot to. Now that we've completed the short rows, or if you didn't complete the short rows, we're up to separating the sleeves and the body. So you can use some scrap yarn or a stitch holder. I just get my darning needle and I thread the shorter panel, and where you'll have your garter panel if you're doing garter, from one marker to the next onto the yarn, as I'm doing here. Make sure you tie it up nice and tight. You don't want to lose those stitches, and we'll still be using that beginning of round marker. We need to add some stitches under the underarm. I'm using this method where you go to purl, you flip the work, you go to purl, and instead of dropping any stitch off, you just pop it back onto that needle there, the left hand needle. So I've done 1, 2, and I have to do 4 for my size. They do have a video to the backwards loop method where you use your thumb. You can use that as well, whatever gets those extra stitches on the needle to give you some more room. And then I just flip the work and I'll be knitting around to the next sleeve. I'm also just popping that beginning of round stitch marker back on where it's meant to go before those 4 stitches. Once we arrive at the next sleeve, we do the exact same thing. Get my darning needle, get a different color piece of thread, and pop that sleeve onto that. Do a knot again. I have to cast on an extra 4 stitches for the underarm and then knit back to the beginning of round marker. Now that we've done that, we have the stitches for the body on the needle. So I have 80 stitches and I'm just knitting in stockinette stitch, so knit stitches around and around and around until I get to the hem. Measuring from the underarm, I'm meant to do stockinette stitches until I hit 5 inches when I then do the hem. Of course, you can do whatever length you like. There's a suggestion for the cropped length. Other modifications you could do here include a kind of moss stitch pattern, some cables. You could do some waist shaping. So this sweater has no shaping around the waist. If you're a woman, you might like to do a couple of decrease stitches either side, just to give it a bit of shaping. But yeah, this is a kid's sweater. I'm just doing stockinette until I hit 5 inches. I just want to add that this also usually takes the longest for me, not just because it's the like makes up the bulk of the sweater, but like relatively per row. Because I put it down, I pick it up, it's stockinette stitch. It's great to do like watching a movie. I don't have to look, but at the same time, it's a bit boring, and I can struggle a bit more to keep at it. I've been knitting two stockinette, like purely stockinette stitch sweaters for like over 12 months, and I'll just do like 10 rows now and then, whereas I'm knitting the Ingrid sweater by Petite Knits and I've almost finished it in 2 weeks. Same with one of their other sweaters, but it's just because the patterns that I'm doing in some sweaters like that aren't just plain stockinette stitch are just so much more fun, and I'm more keen to get them done. So yeah, if you have to put it down and take a break, that's completely fine. Alright, so this is what the sweater looks like. It looks like a sweater now, doesn't it? So I'm measuring from the underarm and it's about 5 inches. I'm happy where it's at. Sometimes I like to do a longer hem, so I'll stop a bit shorter, and especially for kid size, I like a bit longer than 1 inch for a hem and for sleeves. So now it's time to change my needles, because with hems and collars and sleeves, you want to go down a size or two so it's a bit tighter, especially when you're doing ribbing. So I'm using my little pin there to undo that needle. This is why I love interchangeable needles. If you're using a fixed cable needle, then you just knit them onto the other needle. I wanted to add a bit of colour to mine, so I'm doing an orange hem in a simple knit one, purl one ribbing. If you have a number divisible by 4, you could do 2 by 2, which is knit 2, purl 2. If it's divisible by 6, you could even do 3 by 3. You can do whatever you like, but yeah, I'm doing a simple orange 1 by 1 for just a little over 1 inch, I think. I've knit my hem and this is what it looks like. It's getting exciting now because the bulk of the work is done. I just have to do the sleeves and the collar. You might have already done the collar, so you've just got the sleeves to go. And yeah, it knits up pretty quick from here. I'm going to use the regular bind off technique. It's probably the easiest and the first one I learned, but it doesn't have much stretch. So I'm going to undo my smaller needles and I'm going to pop on some larger needles, larger than that I use for the body. So I think I did 6 or 6.5. I'm sorry, I can't quite remember, but it's definitely necessary if you're doing this technique, I think, because this sweater has to go over someone's head and sit on somebody, and you don't want it too tight. I would usually bind off 1 by 1 ribbing using the tubular bind off technique. It is more challenging at first. Once you get your head around it, it's easy. I might even actually make a video of it and pop that up. It is amazing because it looks like the purl and the knit columns are just continuous, but they're actually bound off. There's just no different looking row there. It's beautifully stretchy and it doesn't change the shape of your knitting. There's no flare to it. So yeah, I'll probably pop a video of that up as well. And if you'd like to give that a go, you could do that one. So back to the regular bind off technique, I've knit the first stitch there because I didn't want my marker to slip off, and it's a knit stitch, so we're knitting the knits and purling the purls. So the second stitch on my left hand needle is a purl. I'm going to purl that stitch as per normal, and then I'm getting that first knit stitch, popping my needle into it and popping it over without losing the stitch on my needle there. So we've just reduced one stitch as well. Now, the next stitch on the needle is a knit, so we're going to knit that, then simply go into the first stitch, pop that over the top, bind off, purl the next one because it's a purl, and then pop that stitch over. So we're just doing that around and around and around. I kept the beginning of round marker on there to show you just to the left of it, but still on the right hand needle. We're only ever going to have 1 to 2 stitches on that needle, so we've got 2. I'm just about to bind off and reduce it to 1. And you can see the bound off stitches between that and the marker, and it gets more obvious as we go along, and it gets longer obviously because we're binding off more stitches, and you can kind of test the stretch as well if you kind of pull on it a little bit. But yeah, we're just going to go along and bind the rest of those off. Now that the hem and body is complete, it's time to do the sleeves. So we have to pick up the stitches that are on the waist yarn or your stitch holder and pop them back onto the needles. Typically, I discard the waist yarn once I've knit a row or two because it's just like a safety and a backup just in case I stuff it up or I don't like it. I can just completely undo it and the stitches are still there on the waist yarn. But for this one, I'm just going to pop the stitches all on the needle and get rid of the waist yarn, but you can keep it there for insurance. I have to get rid of some of my cable there because we have to use the magic loop method because the sleeve is quite small for my size, or it might not be for your size. And then we have to join the working yarn. So we just go to knit the first stitch as per normal and leave a bit of a tail, pop the loop over the needle there and knit away. I need to knit across 26 stitches. Now, one thing I want to point out is it is really important to knit in the right direction. So you can see as I'm knitting, the knit stitches that are forming are facing me. So if I were to pick up the underarm and go the other way around the sleeve, the pell bumps would be on the outside and you'd be thinking, why is my sleeve inside out? That is why. So you can even just knit 1 or 2 stitches and have a look at which kind of way the knit stitch is facing. So I'm just speeding through until I get to the underarm and we have to pick up some stitches. I have to pick up 4 stitches because that's how many I casted on when I did that backwards cast on. So I just pop my needle underneath that cast on between the V, pop the yarn around and pull it through. This will leave a gap between the stitches on the cable there and these ones. Usually I pick up extra stitches and extra bits between that gap and then I decrease them to get back to my normal amount of stitches. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to do this technique. So I just have to cast on the 2 there, pop on my beginning of round marker. So this is the new beginning of round, and then pick up 2 more. A couple of important things to note. One, if you're doing the garter panel, say hello to purl stitches again, because every second row you will be purling the garter panel to get that effect. The second important thing to note is that you probably should count how many rows you're doing, just write it down or track it on an app or something, because I have to knit for my size 3 inches even, so no decreases yet. But instead of relying on my measuring skills, I mean, I can count my knitting, but if you're a beginner, you might not be able to. Just jot it down, it's easier. And that way, your sleeves will be the exact same length. I've completed that, so now it's time for a decrease round. For the decrease round, we knit 1 stitch, knit the next 2 together, so just pop your needle through both of them, knit around 2, 3 stitches before the beginning of round marker, where we'll do a slip, slip, knit to decrease a stitch that slants in the other direction. I don't know why, but I've slipped 2 stitches purlwise as you could see there, but you're meant to do knitwise. And then I just pop my needle through the front and knit it. So in that decrease row, we have just decreased 2 stitches. And I'm sorry, this is a do what I say, not do what I do part of the video. Following the decrease row, I have to knit 5 rows even, and then I have to repeat those previous 6 rows. So I have to do another decrease row and another 5 rows even. Your numbers might be a bit different depending on your size. Then when I measure my sleeve, I need 5.5 inches in length. If it's not, I'll have to knit a couple of rows even, but I will be jotting this down so when I do the other sleeve, it will be exactly the same length. Some sizes will also have to do a decrease for ribbing, where you may have to decrease 1 or 3 stitches evenly spaced out on that row, and then you're all good to go ahead with the ribbing. I changed to smaller needles and I'm just doing the 1 by 1 again in the orange color. I'm sorry, I really fast forward through that cuff because it's just a little section of 1 by 1 ribbing, and I'm actually going to do that tubular bind off I was talking about before. We have to cut our yarn, so usually you'd wrap it around 3 or 4 times, but I just eyeball it and make sure I have a long enough end there, and then I grab a darning needle and pop the yarn through that. I'm then going to grab a stitch marker and I'm just going to pop it through the front of the first 2 stitches on my needle, because I need to use these 2 stitches when I come around at the end and I want to be able to easily locate them. Once you've cut the yarn and you've got the marker on there, just skip ahead to where I've done the bind off for the collar, because I actually filmed that a lot clearer, I thought. So just jump ahead in the video. Hopefully it should be in the content, so you can just click it and then click back. Sorry about that. So I've just completed the tubular bind off. Of course, you can do the regular bind off. You can use whatever bind off technique you like, but I'm just going to show you the difference here. So you can see that tubular bind off on the cuff, and then if we have a look at the bind off on the bottom of the hem there, it's got more of a visible line around it and it's not as stretchy. But yeah, you're welcome to use whatever you like. I didn't film the second sleeve because it's the same process. Because I chose to do option 2, I have to pick up stitches all around the neckline with my smaller needles and knit that collar now. So I'm just using this orange yarn that I'm going to use for the collar as I did for the hem and cuffs, and I'm just using that same technique that I did with the underarm, popping in my needle and pulling through the yarn underneath the cast on edge, and I'm trying to do this as evenly as possible. Once I've picked up my 56 stitches, I'll be popping on a beginning of round marker, and I'm just doing a knit 1, purl 1, just like I did the hem and the cuffs. So I'm doing the tubular bind off for the collar, and I'm just going to write down how I remember it. I remember it by saying 1, knit off, 2, purl on, because the stitch stays on. Step 3 is purl off, because you'll be doing a purl action and the stitch will be coming off. And then 4, you have to go through the back, but it's a knit and the stitch stays on. So that will make sense in a second. So step 1, we're going in knitwise through the first stitch, which is on top of a knit column, pulling your long tail through there, and then popping that off the stitch. So again, that's why it's knit and it's off. Then we're going to step number 2. We're skipping the stitch on top of the purl column and we're going to the second stitch on the needle, which is on top of a knit column, and we're going in purlwise, as you can see there, pulling that through. Then step 3 is a purl off. So we're going back to this first stitch on the needle on top of the purl column, purlwise through there, and then that stitch will be coming off of the needle. So that's why it's called purl off. Step 4 is a knit action, so we're going between these 2 stitches, so don't go through any of the loops. We're going clearly between the 2 columns, and get your needle out the way. and then it's knit through the second stitch on the needle there. And that is a knit on because obviously we can't slip it off, it's not the next stitch. And that's the 4-step repeat we go over again and again until all the stitches are bound off. Just going to repeat that a bit faster. Knit off, purl on, so skip, purl, purl off, step 3, don't catch anything, and then step 4, between the back, knit. Now if you forget where you're up to, the stitch that's on top of the column, like that's next on your needle, should kind of give you a guide. But if you need to, you can just rewind this and keep watching. So see how we've got a knit at the top of this column? I know I need to knit it through. If it was a purl, I know that I'd be skipping that stitch and then purling the next knit column. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm getting up to where I've got that stitch marker. I'm doing step 1 here, so I'm doing the knit off. And now I need to use those stitches that are on that marker. So I need to pretend they're basically on the needle. So I just did step 1, I'm up to step 2. So I'm going to skip the stitch on the needle and I'm going to purl into that first stitch on the marker. So purling through there. Then step 3, we're doing the purl off. So we're using that stitch on the needle, purling, that's coming off the needle so we can get rid of the needle now. And then we're still going to do that step 4, so through the back and then knit. So we're going to go between the 2 stitches on the marker and then knit that second stitch on the marker. So yeah, just pretend the marker's a needle basically, and then we can unclip that marker and we've completed the bind off. Now it's time to weave in. Just grabbed a darning needle and I'm just going underneath stitches and snipping the end of that off and then moving on to the next one. And there we go. Here's my little baby Flax. I really like how it's turned out. I hope that yours has been successful or you've learned something along the way or both. Yeah, and I hope it's a wearable product for you or whoever you're making it for. I kind of feel like I want to add something else though. I think I'm going to add a pocket. Yeah, that looks really cute. I'm sorry I didn't film it. I just picked up a couple of stitches on the bottom there and worked back and forth while picking up some side stitches. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it helped. Bye.